Okay, so this is just a super simple, quick update. I'm not gonna do any fancy editing, cuts, whatever, but I just wanna share a little bit about my most recent camera purchase or what I've switched to. I made a video probably 6 months ago about how I believe that the Canon M50 was the best camera value as far as a system, an entire system, under $1,000. I stand by that. The Mark II doesn't really get you anything new in my opinion, but as far as what's available right now, if you're talking body and having reasonable cost lenses, the M50 is still the best in my opinion. However, I recently had some spare change and was able to upgrade. So I found a deal on a used M6 Mark II, which is a couple years newer and then like a tier up from the M50. And I just wanted to share a couple reasons why I decided to go this route and the advantages you might appreciate in a camera like this. So I was able to get it for $700 used from a used camera store near where I live, and that was with the electronic viewfinder, but body only, so no lens, which is a pretty good deal. If you look on eBay, you could probably snag one for that, but being able to just drive out and get it, it was well worth it for me. But this, the M6 Mark II, overall, just a quick overview of what's different. So it has a removable EVF, which is nice if you want to break down the body nice and compact for just walking around town, that sort of thing. The EVF quality, I think it's the exact same insides as the M50, so it's not larger, it's not brighter, it's not fancier in any way, but it pops on and off. And then the body itself, this is what I really appreciated. The body itself has a number of controls that the M50 didn't. So the M50 just had a front dial, so if you wanted to adjust shutter speed, aperture, exposure compensation, ISO, whatever, you basically had to use this dial or the touchscreen to do that. It's all right. And for landscape photography, which is my primary focus, it's not that big a deal to have to slow down to change between those settings or change what that dial is doing. However, the M6 Mark II has that front dial. I don't know if this is focusing or not. It has that front dial. It also has a rear dial, and then it also has a back dial, or maybe a top dial and a rear dial here. So what that gives you is control over, in my case, shutter speed here, aperture here, and then exposure compensation on the back. You can change those to set ISO or move around which is shutter speed, which is aperture. But all in all, that gives you much quicker and much more convenient control over the settings in your camera. And I have found that hugely helpful, and it really just allows me to enjoy shooting a little bit more because it's a quicker, simpler process. I should mention, just as a kind of side note, this is on the iPhone 13 Pro main camera, so the 20 to the 26 millimeter equivalent, and it seems to look pretty good. But anyway, so you've got more dials on here. You've got a larger, a little bit deeper grip. It's still not anything like a DSLR, but it's deeper and it does have a little bit more to grab onto versus the M50. And then you have a manual focus, autofocus switch in the back, which I found really convenient when I am, like if I'm doing a landscape shot and I want to make sure that I just lock focus in, just autofocus, then switch it to manual and you're done. And that switch also has a button in the middle. So you can use this button, again, programmable to just about anything. I have mine set to change the autofocus mode, so zone, point, servo, or zone, point, the AF tracking mode, that kind of thing. And then there's also, of course, your record button, menu, display, all that on the back. But anyway, the physical controls of the camera, in my opinion, are significantly better. Not just a little bit, but significantly better. Along with that, you have a top dial that includes 2 custom modes, which at first I didn't think I would particularly take advantage of, but I've actually set one of those to, so I usually shoot in manual. And then if I see, I'm out here at a lake today, if I see some birds flying by and I want to try to grab some quick shots of them, I can switch into custom 1, and I've set that at the highest burst rate and the zone autofocus, servo autofocus, 1/1000th of a second, shutter speed, auto ISO, basically everything that you need preset, you can program into that custom mode, and with the turn of that 1 notch, I'm ready to shoot birds, which is really convenient. I've actually caught a bald eagle, as well as some herons and some other stuff, kind of in the middle of shooting landscapes, because I see them and I think, okay, just flip to that, grab your shot, move on. Then in the second one I have set for long exposures, so it automatically changes some of the settings for how I shoot long exposures, which is really nice. Moving on with the physical controls, I'm gonna take the EVF off because I can't decide if I love it or hate it, but this has a flip up screen rather than the M50's fully articulating sideways flipping screen. I love it. I'd say 90% of the time I appreciate being able to just kind of look down and see what I'm shooting if I'm shooting in a landscape orientation. And I've used it a couple times for video, so being able to see yourself is nice. The obvious downsides are that you don't have, first of all, I shoot a lot of landscapes in portrait mode, and I cannot articulate that screen so I can look straight down at it, which I do miss. Oftentimes I'm shooting low to the ground with an ultra-wide lens, and the ability to look down at it rather than have to crouch down and get just about to ground level for it is kind of frustrating. It's kind of frustrating that I'm stuck without it now. But it articulates fully up like this, and it also does fold out. I'd say it's 45 degrees. My tripod plate's in the way right now, but about 45 degrees down. So that's, take it or leave it, I guess. I could go either way, but it is nice having it fold up whenever I'm just doing a nice like hip level landscape shot. Then there's a pop-up flash just like the M50. However, this is my much preferred method for a pop-up flash, or design for a pop-up flash. The one in the M50 is useless because if you actually pop that flash up and take a photo of somebody, you've just completely whitewashed the whole photo. It's gonna look hideous. There's gonna be bright shadows everywhere. Never once did I use the flash on that M50 because I knew I would just ruin whatever I was photographing. However, with this style, you can bounce it off the ceiling. So if you're in a smaller room, lower ceiling, a white ceiling specifically, you can actually bounce it off the ceiling and it'll give you a lot of soft fill light without that harsh shadow or direct flash kind of look. So honestly, if all cameras that had pop-up flashes had this style, I think the world would be a better place. But anyway, that's what this one's got, and I've used it a couple times here or there. It also, I should mention, has a larger battery than the M50. So this is the LPE17, and then in the M50 it was the LPE12. So I think it's about 100 more shots that this one's rated for, and I would say that I've experienced that for sure. There've been plenty of mornings that I was out shooting birds all morning, and I easily took 1,000 photos. And as I got back to the car is when I was finally showing that battery indicator that you need to change. So I've appreciated that as well. The ports are, I would say, very similar to the M50. It has a mic jack. It has a remote cable release. The only unique one is that you have a USB-C port on the right-hand side, along with your micro USB or micro HDMI. But that USB-C port allows you to charge the camera if you have the right power adapter and if the camera's off. You cannot power the camera while it's shooting a time lapse or video or something like that, which I was a little bit sad about, but it hasn't really affected me too much. So again, finishing out the physical stuff, personal opinion, this doesn't really make that big a difference to me, but this does have a new 32 megapixel sensor. It's still APS-C, it's still the same size. It has very similar performance. Like, I could almost not tell a difference on, if you've ever checked out like DP Review's studio scene comparison. You can check different ISOs, you can check different dynamic range, or how far they're pushing an image, and it is technically better, and I appreciate that. But it's very, very similar. And the megapixel count, I've cropped quite heavily. Like, here's a picture of a bald eagle that I cropped very heavily, and having the 32 megapixels I'm sure helps. But the reality is, with most lenses that I'm going to be using at the price point I can afford, that 32 megapixels isn't going to be fully taken advantage of because the lens it doesn't have enough resolving power to make a huge difference. But I would say those are the physical differences. It's got better handling, it's got better controls, it's got better battery life, it's got a different screen. I wouldn't say better screen. I have appreciated having the removable EVF because like if I put my 22 millimeter pancake lens on here, take the EVF off, it's almost as small as the M100 that I once owned, and that's a big advantage. I'll just point out so you're aware of it, that with this EVF setup, first of all, if you forget your EVF and you want one, that kind of a downside, right? If you don't have it, you can't use it. Second, this does take the place of a flash. So if you want to use flash and an EVF, sorry about you with this camera, you don't have that option. But so far, I'm not a flash shooter, being a landscape photographer. And then the EVF, I usually leave it off unless I know I'm going to need it. So if I'm out here shooting birds, I know I'm going to want it, want to have the camera up to my eye, or if I know it's a bright sunny day, I'll put it on. Other than that, it's nice to be able to size down by removing it. So that's the camera. I did want to run through just really quick, if you're interested, my lens setup that I've got right now. And I gotta say, I'm pretty satisfied. I'm always playing with stuff. I'm always wanting to just take it that step further, but I'm pretty satisfied with what I've got right now. This is the Canon 11 to 22 millimeter ultra-wide lens for the EOS M system. It's collapsible, and then you gotta pop it out to use it, which is kind of frustrating, but ultimately it's a smaller lens, so I appreciate that. It's a decent range. It's the equivalent of just under 18 millimeters up to 35 millimeters. I had the 10 to 18 millimeter EF-S lens, which is technically wider, but I actually, I ran into a couple issues with it. First of all, it's bigger, which is not that big a deal. It's about the same weight, but I did some real estate photography, and every single one of the photos that had a ceiling light in the photo had this big, I mean, there's 2 or 3 different flare spots across the frame that I had to go in and touch up. So this lens does have better flare performance. Overall, it's a sharper lens. It's technically a little bit brighter aperture, and then it's a smaller build. So it's nice to have a nice compact lens for a nice compact camera. So let me grab my other options here. This is the 22 millimeter pancake lens. Highly recommend this. If you own any EF M camera or EOS M camera, you know, M100, M50, this is just the kind of thing. It's cheap enough. You get it like 150 bucks or cheaper used. It's an f2 35, so in full frame equivalent, it's 35 millimeter f3.2, but in APS-C, it's a 22 millimeter f2, which is perfect for just kind of walking around, or if you've got kids, you know, trying to keep track of them and take some photos. Just a bright enough aperture to get some of that background separation without being a giant clunky lens. So highly recommend that one. This is the Sigma 30 millimeter f2, which I think I mentioned in my last video is an incredible deal for a nice bright do-it-all kind, I wouldn't say portrait lens, but a nice do-it-all nifty 50 for the APS-C system. This being an f1.4, it has, A, it's really good in low light, B, you can get some background separation. My wife and I shot a wedding, and I used this lens almost exclusively, had plenty of beautiful, nice separated portraits and that kind of thing. So highly recommend this. I'll give the caveat that I actually have the Canon EF M, the 32 millimeter f1.4 on the way. It's Canon's version of this lens. I want to give it a shot just because it's a little bit smaller, and it technically is supposed to have a little bit better optical performance, but more so I'm worried about the size, because this isn't large by any means, but having such a small camera, if I can pack down just a little bit more, that's for the better. So that's the 30 millimeter. This is one of my more recent purchases. This is the Canon 18 to 150 millimeter. It's an f4, let me make sure I get this right, f3.5 to 6.3. So it's decently bright on the wide end, but that 6.3 kicks in really early, so don't buy this lens for low light shooting. However, let me show you what spurred me on to get this. This is the 18 to 150. This is what I was using for my anything over 22 millimeters. I had this 55 to 250 lens. This is an incredible lens. Do not underestimate this lens just because it's $100. However, if I want an ultralight kit, I can use my M6 Mark II along with the 11 to 22 millimeter and this, and it's just remarkably small. It of course does extend as you zoom, but for something with this range, this is a fantastic size, and it's pretty decent optical performance. It's all that I need for my hobby photography. This does, I used to own the 18 to 135 for the EFS cameras or for the Canon DSLRs. And the size of this is dramatically smaller. And then I would say that it is better optically than that 18 to 135, and it zooms a little bit further. So highly recommend this. It's a pricey lens. I want to say I paid $325 for this, something like that. Again, used on eBay. But ultimately, I would say it's well worth it because this is the kind of thing you could leave on your camera 90% of the time, and it covers a full frame range of 28 to 240 or so, which is most of what you're going to be doing. I could use this one lens and get plenty of landscape shots, even a little bit of wildlife, you know, geese. You heard the geese flying overhead, that kind of thing. You could get some good photos as well as family stuff. Coming back to this guy here, this thing, ultimately, is actually very small in the grand scheme of things. But because you do have to use an adapter to mount this on an EOS M camera, it's a little bit larger, certainly larger than the EOS M lenses. However, as I mentioned in my last video, this is an incredible lens for the price. 55 to 250, specifically the where is it posted? IS-STM. You do not want the IS3, the IS2, the whatever else it might be. The IS-STM has significantly better optics as well as significantly better autofocus and just general performance. It gives you up to a 400 millimeter equivalent in a tiny little lens like this, and also has a reason. I mean, 5.6 is not a bright aperture, but it's enough to give you some separation. It's enough to do decent in low light. I will say, just as a little bit of a side note, this is the Viltrox EOS M adapter. I think in my last video I recommended it. I might have to take that back because I've actually had some pretty often now. I've been having issues with the lens essentially losing connection with the camera. So it'll say F0 and then I won't have any autofocus, and I have to basically remount the lens and then it's fine. But when you're trying to track a bird flying across the water or something, that's an awful time for that to happen. I briefly owned it was the Sigma 150 to 600 millimeter lens, just this beastly thing. And I actually did some tests. If I've still got the photos, I'll post them right here in the video. But I did some tests to see how much advantage am I getting from having a 600 millimeter lens versus a 250 millimeter. And the funny thing is, I'm pretty sure this was a good copy. It wasn't just a broken lens, but at 250 millimeters on this lens and 600 millimeters on the Sigma, I was getting almost the exact same resolution. The sharpness to the image was almost the exact same, if not a little bit of an advantage to this. You don't get nearly as much background separation with this because 250 millimeter f5.6 is very different from 600 millimeter f6.3. Basically, you get more of that blur in the background with the longer focal length and the aperture there. But all that to say, if you're just trying to do some casual, shooting birds, here the bald eagle that I took was with this lens. Bald eagle shot, I didn't steal a bald eagle. But anyway, this is an incredible performer, and I would highly recommend it for really anybody that has this kit. If you've got to go cheap with the adapter, get a Viltrox adapter, but the Canon one's going to be more reliable, most likely. So finally, I'll say one more thing. Maybe I'll stop talking, but coming back to the body, I have one more lens on the way. I've got that 32 millimeter, as well as I was actually able to get a deal from a guy that was selling both. He had the Sigma 56 millimeter f1.4 available, which is actually a little bit shorter than that 30 millimeter. And also, as far as I've seen in reviews, has incredible performance, and it will be a perfect headshot body portrait lens, and also may be fun. I play around with leaves and isolating subjects in the woods, so it'll be nice for that as well. But anyway, if you have any questions about this, feel free to comment down below. If you've made it this far, thanks for watching. But I've really enjoyed this setup. I've had it probably 3 months now, maybe 4 months. Got it back when it was still warm, and I've traveled with it. I've shot plenty in low light and bright sunlight, good weather, bad weather, all that kind of stuff. And anyway, just wanted to let you know that this is a great deal. And honestly, if you're looking at the EOS M system, the EOS M system, this is going to be your best option. It is the top of the line model. I know that there's a lot of concern about at this point. Let's assume they're not going to come out with any more lenses. They're walking away from this system. Canon now has the RF system with their full frame bodies. We can kind of assume they're just going to abandon this one. That's fine. There's plenty of options available, and I've personally tried to make an intentional effort not to always be looking for that upgrade, but see what's out there and especially play with used gear, because you can more or less buy it and sell it and not lose any money. But I'd highly recommend this, and these lenses have been some of my favorites along the way. So thanks for watching, and have a good day, week, whatever's happening.